Alright, let's go on to creating character. Non-binary. Yes, the CIA in the 80s has a non-binary person working for them. Yes, President Ronald Reagan, the guy who said this.
To add the AIDS virus to the list of contagious diseases for which immigrants and aliens seeking permanent residence in the United States can be denied entry.
Is allowing a non-binary person to work under him. Now that's what I call historic realism. That's a little joke for ya. Hey ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Double H Speaks here, back with another Call of Duty video. This time I'm pitting the Black Ops games against each other. The old and the reboot / sequel or whatever it is. Now the gaming world is filled with people comparing Modern Warfare with this, and the general consensus reads Warfare is much better since Cold War seems to be very poorly optimized in general, PC and consoles, but that's another topic. I'll be comparing the old Black Ops to the new one. Why? Because the world is going to shit. This weird dude is the richest man ever, and so we need to compare video games from 10 years back to video games are now. Anyway, so like always, a quick recap of my history with the old one. I played it originally when it came out, and I was skeptical of the game as Modern Warfare 2 was released just before that, and I didn't want to play another old style COD, but boy, I was wrong. To this day, the original Black Ops remains one of the most fun and compelling CODs ever, with some of the best maps for its multiplayer, and hands down one of the best, if not the best, COD campaigns ever made. So with the COD series entering this sort of reboot phase now, with Modern Warfare of last year, I thought it would be fun comparing the campaigns of both of these games, not the multiplayer, as I feel this is one aspect where the newer games will always be better than the old ones just based on gameplay improvements and player counts alone, but the campaign is another story, as the old Black Ops is still remembered for being one of the best stories told in a shooter. So the criteria that I will be choosing is the story, setting, and characters of both game, and the gameplay to a lesser degree, as again the newer game will obviously be better in some departments. So let's get on with it. By the way, there will be spoilers for both of the games, so be warned, but they've been out for like a year now, so who cares. So number one, the story. The stories of both games are vastly different, with Cold War being sort of like a quasi reboot sequel to the original game. So back to it, the original Black Ops had you playing as Alex Mason, a CIA operative active during the 60s who is sent to assassinate Fidel Castro during the very first mission. He then gets captured and brainwashed into turning a double agent, and it's revealed slowly throughout the game that he's actually a triple agent who had his mind fucked with, and goes on a world-hopping campaign to find and kill the main antagonist, a Soviet general called Nikita Dragovich, and some of his cronies. That's the basic gist of it, and what ensues is a mind-bending and intricate campaign that takes you across the harrowing battlefields of Vietnam, the urban settings of Cuba, escape from a Soviet-era gulag, and even to the icy depths of the Arctic in an excellent flashback sequence from World War II. The game was intense, action-filled, and full of interesting and memorable characters and events that I can still recall fondly after a decade. Cold War, in comparison, takes place in the 80s, and you play as non-binary character number 1, or whatever kind of person you want to be, as you can create the character named Bell, who shares the spotlight with Mason and Woods in the gameplay, as you go through the end of the Cold War under Ronald Reagan in pursuit of a mysterious Soviet entity named Perseus, and your plan is to stop the Reds into unleashing nuclear annihilation. You know, just like the plot of Rocky IV. Here you go through the hellfire of Vietnam, the dark seas of West Germany, an ultra-secret meeting with Gorbachev where he speaks to everybody in English.
If you've not met him already, this is Imran Zakayev.
Now looking at the premise alone, Black Ops wins in the story department by leaps and bounds. But to go more in depth, Black Ops starts you out in an interrogation room with unknown voices yelling at you and forcing you to recount your past activities, as they think you are the link to stopping Dragovich and his plans to unleash a biochemical weapon called Nova 6. The start is disorientating and utterly captivating as you are hooked from the get-go, as the central mystery of who you are, who your captors are, and why you are the key to stopping Nova 6 builds and builds into this beautiful crescendo of action, death, and suspense. And as the story gets more and more interesting, and especially the reveal of your brainwashing and the stakes at play here is revealed, it is some of the best storytelling Call of Duty has ever done. Cold War, on the other hand, leans much more into the stealth and sabotage aspects of the era, and has you sneak around collecting clues and evidence on the identity of Perseus, and tries to build up intrigue through that. But in doing that, it fails to achieve the scope and brilliance of the previous Black Ops, as its settings are far less interesting and characters are blander than ever. The story is based around Perseus activating a series of nukes around Western Europe that the United States itself has played as a deterrent during the 50s. Yeah, real smart thing, placing literal nukes among your allied countries as a deterrent for invasion. Who thought of that idea? So let me get this straight, you want to annihilate millions of people rather than them getting invaded by the Reds and having a chance to fight back just cause they might get turned into communists. Anyway, the nuclear codes get stolen of course, and it's up to you to stop Perseus from blowing it up. And therein lies the problem. The game washes over the aspect of America's real fault in this event and goes for a super patriotic gung-ho approach of a couple of badasses saving the world.
Just being free and American, man.
As case in point, the inclusion of Ronald Reagan, which is the perfect president to represent this kind of attitude. Nothing against the guy, but the story loses any kind of nuance as there is no repercussions to your actions even when you literally invade a Russian government building in Moscow, shoot up that place and escape with confidential documents. Your actions seem to have no impact at all on the overall story as you go from place to place, sneaking and fighting to collect evidence until you uncover Perseus. The reveal of who Perseus is very underwhelming, as even the main twist you will see coming a mile away. Contrast this with Black Ops, where every mission builds into your character, as the whole game tells the story of Mason and builds his backstory and shows you why your actions in the past have dire consequences in the present. So point here obviously goes to Black Ops, the original. Now let's come to the setting, as both games represent their time frames well, with soundtracks, outfits and weapons from their respective eras gives each game its own distinct feel. But the places in Black Ops has this real gritty and warlike element to them, whereas Cold War feels too much polished and slick for its own good. Let's take a look at a place which both games share, Vietnam. Look at what Black Ops does with this place from the very beginning. It feels like total war. You're down in the trenches, enemies coming at you from every which way. The sheer number of people coming at you here is fucking chaos, like how Nam was supposed to be. The tone feels just right, and I remember originally how hard this mission was as I constantly died, and replaying it too, I got my butt kicked here, even on regular difficulty. And once you beat this level, there is a sense of catharsis and adrenaline rush from the overwhelming nature of it all. Now compare this to the Cold War mission, and you can see what I mean with true polish. This place barely looks like a battlefield, even with modern graphics. The place looks beautiful, but it's missing the grit, and it's way too easy, even when playing on the hardest setting. See here how I drop Charlie like flies, and how it feels so linear and cramped. Whereas Black Ops, even though it was linear in its design, felt way more open-ended. Even on another mission in Nam where you're supposed to face overwhelming odds, it feels like the opposite, as the overall presentation just brings it down. And this is an example of how the place and setting is for the whole game, as the location in Black Ops feel more real and in turn more immersive compared to Cold War. Even with the modern engine and polish, the old one is just better. So again, point to Black Ops. So now let's look at the characters, and we can look at everybody in the game, so let's just focus on the main guy and the villain of both games. In Black Ops, you start out as a bland and generic action hero caricature, but as you continue playing as Mason, he develops psychologically as you see his motivations and how others have an effect on him, especially in his time in jail, especially with a dude called Viktor Reznov, who is sort of a mentor to him, with his own motivation and grudges against both countries. And throughout your journey, you see how both the governments of the United States and Russia manipulate him into becoming the man he is today. The journey you go through is very gray, and there is no good guy overall, as both the United States and the Soviets have their hands dirty, which is what the best stories usually do. Mason develops into a fully formed person with a flawed personality, but redeems himself by the end. Now looking at Bill in Cold War, there is barely a comparison, as you play the classic FPS mute dude from back in the 90s who fails to develop at all. Even with all the stuff you find out about him, Jesus. Later in the game, there are shades of Black Ops' brainwashing story here and there, but it feels very ham-fisted and forced, like it's there to remind us of the greatness of the past rather than the mediocrity of the present. So Bell is just there as a camera, and I thought we moved past this mute guy trope back in the mid-2000s, but nope, apparently he's making a comeback. Now looking at the villains, Black Ops has you following the trail of Dragovich and his two cronies, the brutal Lev Kravchenko and the former Nazi scientist called Dr. Friedrich Steiner, as they plan to release a bioweapon called Nova 6 upon upon mainland USA, and they have sleeper agents all over the states that is prepared to attack as soon as they hear a broadcasting. All three men have distinct personalities, and within it you see flashbacks about their motivations and why these men are willing to do the crimes that they're doing. And we see people from both sides of the Iron Current trying to fight to prevent that shit from happening. The quest for Dragovich takes an interesting turn when you meet Viktor Reznov, who has beef with Dragovich since World War II and who guides and helps Mason throughout the campaign, whereas by the end you see Reznov is basically a hallucination on your part as he reprogrammed you when Dragovich tried to make you into one of his sleeper agents. Now that is a convoluted but interesting plot. I may have butchered it and it doesn't make as much sense, but playing the game is much more clear. The constant brainwashing has messed with your mind, and Dragovich and his men has become this sort of monster looming large over the whole game, as Reznov constantly reminds you of their names in order to build hatred.
Dragovich, Dreshenko, Stein, all must die. Dragovich, Dreshenko, Stein, all must die.
Dragovich brainwashed you, but Reznov had plans of his own.
The villains here complete the themes of the story of the tainted victory of World War II, where both the USA and Russia took in Nazis as a way to get an advantage over the other nation, and how the sins of the past comes back to bite you in the ass in the present. Going back to Cold War, the game has you chasing this person called Perseus, as I said before, and you work for it throughout the game, finding out clues leading to his identity. And again, there are massive problems. The game presents you with multiple evidence suggesting Perseus may not be this one person but a group of spy cells that the Soviets are trying to prop up to be some sort of a large boogeyman looming over America. Treyarch tries to add some nuance when they imply that the American warhawks, quote-unquote the Republicans, is just using his idea to keep the Cold War going. But this leads nowhere, as Perseus is revealed to be just some generic Russian dude with a mustache who wants to destroy the West for, reasons. All the build-up is very underwhelming, and if you are spoiled on the reveal, say thank you so you don't get expectations like me. The game lacks any subtlety or nuance, which is very much needed when dealing with these sensitive political themes of the Cold War. Instead, it's barely a 4-hour exercise in jingoistic American nationalism, filtered through the lens of the CIA, whose crimes are just washed over even when they reveal at the end how heinous they actually were, as in they brainwash the main dude into doing their bidding and basically be a slave. Perseus fails to be a compelling villain at all, as like Bell, his identity is revealed at the end with no motivation, no character development, leading to a flat one-note person. He's basically Russian bad guy number one, whose model they probably copied off of Rocky IV's ending, so point heavily towards Black Ops. And now we come to the gameplay at last. Just comparing the shooting and overall mechanics is useless, as these games are 10 years apart, so Cold War obviously wins by default, but the implementation of said mechanics is overall a different story. See here, the opening of Black Ops is bombastic, gets your heart racing right away, and you kill Fidel fucking Castro within the first minutes of the game, which immediately establishes Mason as a badass. Now see here, Cold War's opening mission. You still play as Mason and go on a rooftop chase to find this guy called Qasim Javadi, who or why is not stated, and is less action filled, and when you actually catch up to him, you are given the choice to kill him or let him go. Yeah, the choice system from Black Ops 2 returns, but only in name. As you choose to let him live, your associate Adler kills him anyway.
What do you want? Don't.
Guess I'm the bad cop.
Whatever you say.
So what's the fucking point? It's moronic. The choice system is applied throughout the game, as it now has surface level RPG elements. You now have a safe house and you get to choose missions from a board. It also contains these 2 side missions which you have the illusion of control in, as you need to gather evidence throughout your main missions to find out about spies and then trigger these side missions to successfully eliminate. But finding all the evidence does jack shit, as the mission plays out the same way, and all that the evidence does is give you some puzzle element where you actually have to think and find out about the spies and stuff. This side mission and evidence gathering is sort of fun, don't get me wrong, but it's far too shallow to make any kind of impact on the overall game, as it leads to generic shoot 'em up missions where the evidence has no impact on the gameplay. It seems that they have tried to implement these mechanics but fell short, maybe because the product was rushed, as evident in numerous articles that I've read leading up to its release. The game also features a very open-ended mission where you take control of a Soviet defector named Belkov and you can sabotage a Soviet government building by planting evidence, falsifying documents, which is probably the best mission in the game. But again, it ends with you going into a massive firefight in Moscow, killing important Soviet personnel, and ending it in a blaze of glory as you exit into the streets of the city in a goddamn car. Although Black Ops is very straightforward with just action elements, the stealth style gameplay and open-ended missions in Cold War do very little and feels rushed and incomplete. There is a semblance of a great game to be found here, but it feels like the devs said nah fuck it and stuck to the same generic COD set pieces we all expect by now. Hell, Modern Warfare had a better campaign than this and did far better telling the same exact story as before. The only thing it does better than Black Ops or any other COD up to this point are the stealth elements. Only because this one actually has a stealth system, and the gameplay like here where you're doing spy shit on a mission in West Berlin feels great and offers some form of challenge. Speaking of challenge, this game was way too easy, even on the harder difficulties, as I had to play on realistic instead of the normal veteran to get some semblance of a challenge here, as opposed to Black Ops, which is still hard on veteran difficulty. So the last point also goes to Black Ops, which is a shame really, as I tried hard to look for stuff to give to Cold War, but except for the graphics, it fails to live up to its Black Ops name, and that is the problem. This feels like two different games in one, a Cold War spy thriller, which was probably the game Sledgehammer was working on before the whole debacle with their dev team quitting, and a second very rushed Black Ops element, which feels tacked on. It's almost like Activision called on Treyarch to inject it forcefully with some Mason and Woods DNA.
Get in position. Just it.
Ooh, that sounds nasty. And that is evident in the gameplay, as Mason and Woods barely feature in the campaign at all, and it feels very tacked on. And is this feeling of a lack of cohesion brings the product down. Even the multiplayer and gameplay is a huge letdown from the last entry, as Call of Duty reverts back to the old Black Ops 4 systems instead of the excellent Modern Warfare slowed down gritty gameplay. So as we come to an end, Cold War gets heavily beaten by the original Black Ops in almost every way, as it offers more gameplay variety with helicopter missions, boat missions, stealth, underwater stuff, and a much better story. While Cold War has the DNA of something great within it, but fails to realize its own potential, wasting opportunities left and right. It may have the flashes of greatness here and there, like the stealth and the open-ended nature of the campaign, and multiple endings. I mean two endings, a good one and a bad one, like a bad 90s RPG, but it overall falls short of what it could have been. And I didn't even get to the launch issues it's still having, with frequent server problems, laggy gameplay. I admit they fixed some of it, but come on. This is a multi-million-dollar release of a almost $70 game, so how could you fuck up this bad? Even after buying the disc, you have to download the campaign in 3 parts. 3 fucking parts. And you know how long the campaign is? It's like 4 to 5 hours. Yup, while Black Ops still took me about 10 hours to beat, and thinking back, I think it was like, what, 2 or 3 CDs? So looking at the overall picture, both games are kinda like the presidents it represents. Black Ops is JFK, beloved by all, remember well, thoughtful, badass, and killed in Cuba, while Cold War is like Ronald Reagan, ultra patriotic, no shades of grey, full-on B-movie story riddled with issues, and half of the time it doesn't even know where it is. So this has been Double E Speaks, and for more Call of Duty content, please like, share, sub, all the good stuff, and stay safe out there. Over and out.